Hey everybody. This is the 20-gallon tank I set up for my wife to enjoy. And earlier today I was in here doing some maintenance on it. It had a lot of Java fern that was getting really overgrown, and the water sprite that's floating in there was getting really overgrown. The root system was hanging down into the tank, and it was just so busy with plants that I failed to notice that a lot of the fish population in there has gone away. A lot of the population was guppies and endlers, and I think some of the reason they've gone away is that the angelfish in this tank is getting a little bit bigger now. And so while I did have some breeding guppies in here, you can see I'm down to one poor little female in there being chased around by those two males. And so I'm probably going to get in there and separate that female out of there. I have a tank down in the basement that's a sorority tank. It's just all females, female guppies, that is, in that tank. And so I'm probably going to put her down there where she won't be harassed so much by those two males. But that was about it. I had the one live bear you can see right there in the middle. I got the sword tail. And I've got my Corydoras swimmy. She's down on the bottom somewhere. Don't see her at the moment. But that was it. The tank was looking really kind of empty. So I ran out to the big chain pet store today, across town, about 15 minutes away from me. And I bought 5 long fin skirt tetras. And I bought 5 bloodfin tetras. Now, they've only been in the tank for a little while, and so everybody's still kind of swimming around. You can see this angelfish down here is just kind of laying low in the corner. It doesn't really know what's going on in its tank. It's had all its plants removed. It's had its water changed. The glass has been wiped down. I cleaned out the filter, so the water flow is a lot more, can't exactly call it vigorous, but it's a lot more vigorous than it was in this tank prior to the water change. And so as a result, everybody's still just kind of a little bit sketched out, laying low, and not really behaving as they normally would, although the guppies are in there just doing their guppy thing. Guppies pretty much always do that. But I wanted to talk a little bit about quarantining the fish because, again, I did not quarantine the fish that went in this tank, and I didn't quarantine some fish that I bought recently when I put them downstairs. And whenever I think about quarantining fish, I always think about the risk to cost ratio. What are the risks involved, and then what would be the cost if something went wrong? And generally speaking, the risks involved is bringing home something that's probably going to be more of a nuisance. In all of the years I've been bringing fish home, I have never brought home anything from a fish store other than ick. I mean, I've brought home some fish that didn't make it, whether they had parasites in their gut or whatever, I don't know. But I've never brought home anything that's really infected a tank or gotten other fish in the tank infected. Even fish that have come home that developed the fuzzy stuff on their eyes or white fuzzy spots on their body. That's never spread to other fish from anything I've ever brought home from a fish store. Now, I have brought fish home from the wild and had other issues, but I've never brought home anything from the fish store other than ick. And of course, the ick will infect all the fish in your tank. And I've lost fish due to ick because I didn't catch it in time. And if you don't catch ick in time, it is guaranteed to be deadly. It will kill your fish if you ignore it. It is not something that will clear up on its own. It will get worse and worse until your fish die. Only when there's no fish left in the tank will the ick finally die off. So it is something you need to pay attention to, but if you notice the early signs of ick, and you can catch it early, which is easy enough to do if you pay attention, it's not much more than a little bit of a nuisance. It's really, really easy to treat. There's a variety of ways you can treat it depending on your situation and what kind of tank you've got set up and how you want to treat it. You can treat it with heat. You can treat it with a variety of different medications. And so it's not really much more than a hassle. So I am aware of the fact that there are other things I could bring home. I can't name any of them because they're very, very uncommon. But there are other things you can bring home that you can infect a tank with, and there are things that can be deadly that might require me to medicate the tank or something like that. But again, As of now, in the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and countless hundreds of fish that I've brought home over the years, I've never experienced that. So while I am aware that it is a possibility, it's not, there's just not enough risk there for me to worry that much about it. Now, this is where it gets a little on the callous side. The fish that are in this tank, when we get into the risk factor, let's say on the outside 1 in 1,000 chance or 1 in 10,000 chance or whatever it is that I did bring home some virulent disease that's now going to wipe out all the fish in this tank because I didn't quarantine them. You know, my wife is attached to this angelfish. That would be a tough loss. But otherwise, I mean, we've gotten over the loss of angelfishes before. It's a $4 fish. It's not, again, it's just that I know that sounds callous, but it's just not that big of a deal to take the minor risk of putting fish in this tank without quarantining them first. I will keep my eye on this tank. I will talk to my wife about what to look for. She sees this tank a lot more than I do. But for the next couple of weeks, I will be keeping a very close eye on this tank to make sure I don't see any early signs of ick or any other problems breaking out. And if I do, I can treat them accordingly. This is also a small enough tank that if I were to put the fish in a quarantine tank and then subsequently need to medicate them at some point in the future, how different would that be than just simply medicating them in this small tank? If I were putting these in a 125 gallon tank, that might be a different factor to consider. If I had to medicate that tank, that's a lot of medication. This tank is not much bigger than the size of the tank that I would be medicating if I put them in quarantine anyway. So I think about all these things when I decide whether or not I'm going to quarantine the fish. I think about the source where I got them and the reliability. I do have 2 different pet stores around here. One of them is a little more likely to send ick home with me than this one is. I know this was the big chain pet store. This is PetSmart that I came from today. But again, in all the years I've been bringing fish home from this PetSmart, probably only once or twice, have I had an issue with ick coming out of this fish store, and that both times was on neons. I don't know what it is about neons or the way neons are bred, but neons go into quarantine, put it that way. I've had ick on neons often enough that I put neons in quarantine. They are little ick vectors. I don't know why, but neons always seem to carry ick, or they're very much more likely to carry ick than other species of fish that I've gotten from big chain pet stores. So again, if you know your source and you know what fish you're dealing with, if you know what to look for, if you've got any suggestions of virulent diseases that these fish might bring home, that, I know that there's freshwater velvet, I guess, is one that I can think of now that I've let it mull around in my head a little while. I know there's a marine velvet. I believe there is a freshwater velvet, not related, but they're just called the same thing because they have very similar appearance. But that is a pretty bad disease. If you get that in your tank, that can wipe out a whole tank, and I'm not really sure how to treat it, etc. But again, it's just something I've never experienced in all the years I've been keeping fish and all the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fish I've brought home. I've just never had an experience with it. So it's just not something I worry about. If it was something that happened to me on occasion, I might be a little more concerned about it. But as of yet, it's never happened to me. All I've ever had to worry about was just bringing a little bit of ick home. And as far as I'm concerned, I just treat ick with Ick Attack. And it's a product that you just put it in the tank every day. It takes a capful for every 10 gallons. And after a couple of weeks, you're done. You just do a water change and get on back with your life as normal. And that's all there is to it. So treating ick is not really much more than a minor inconvenience. And that's only if it's necessary. I'm not one of these people that just gets fish and then just automatically starts medicating them, whether they need meds or not. I know some people out there believe that whenever you bring a fish home, you should put it right into quarantine and then start dumping medication in the tank to treat it for all these things, just in case it has them. And I don't do things like that. I don't, I'm not going to flood these fish with medication if they don't need it. If for no other reason, I'm not spending money on medication to give to fish that aren't sick. So if I notice that something is going on, I won't hesitate to purchase the necessary meds and so on and so forth. But just randomly medicating new fish when I got them just for the sake of medicating them is not something I've ever been a fan of doing, and I've never subscribed to that practice myself. Quarantining, on the other hand, like I said, is something I do from time to time, depending on the fish, depending on what tank they're going in. Every scenario is unique. But those are some of the things I consider when making my decision about whether I'm going to bother with quarantining these or not. Again, where did I get them? What kind of fish are they? What tank are they going in? How big is the tank? What other fish are in the tank? You know, if I have a huge sentimental attachment, my Tenopoma in my 125, for example, I'd be very reluctant to put fish in that tank without quarantining them first because I don't want anything to happen to that. That would be emotionally devastating. I know I could replace the fish for a few dollars, but I've had that fish for years and years. It's one of my oldest fish, and I really, really would not want to lose that fish over some stupid lack of quarantine mistake. So again, you know, that might be a little bit distasteful or maybe a little bit callous sounding to some people that I, you know, put the value of one fish's life above or below another. But, you know, that's the way it is. And that's, you know, I'm not going to lie to you about my decision-making process. That does factor into whether or not fish get quarantined or not. That's, you know, that's the reality of it. So there you go. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the same topic. And again, if you know of any virulent diseases that I'm overlooking other than the freshwater velvet that I can think of, by all means let me know in the comment section down below. So hope you enjoyed the look at the new fish and the slightly cleaned out aquarium. It still looks a little on the grubby side, but that's just old residue and stuff. And in fact, I've actually got to get in there. If you see all that, that is Java moss, and it is growing on the glass in the back of the tank, and we've got it growing, you know, pretty much on everything. Java moss is one of those things that once you put it in a tank, you'll have it in that tank forever. Java moss is probably harder to get rid of than duckweed, and so I've still got Java moss in this tank from way back in the day, and I'll get in there and clean a little more of that out later. So thanks again for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Make sure you're subscribed. Don't forget I call this one my wife's tank. And I'll see you real soon in the next one.